back to part two. Tonight we're joined for the first time, actually, a debut on the show by Graham Bean, the former FA Compliance Officer, ex-South Yorkshire Copper, and currently Chief Executive of Chesterfield. When I say currently, I don't mean to say that you're under pressure, because you're not responsible for results, but fortunately a win, so important. Before we go to Andy Giddings, a win so important.
Yeah, it was so important for us. You know, and when you get a run like we've had, it resonates through the club as well. So the staff, even as well as the players and the coaching staff, the actual sort of admin staff feel the pressure as well. Yeah. You know, the club's flat, and you know that win gives a massive boost to everybody. And
not least a tremendous relief, as he admitted, to John Sheridan, who said that he'd never had a run like it, a win at the 11th attempt, I think, this season.
Yeah,
so, you know,
it was just sort of completely baffling as to why we just couldn't get over the line. And
one thing about that, though, it did illustrate faith from the top of the club. There was never, or it was stated that there was never any question of John Sheridan being under pressure. That was a club statement as well, wasn't it?
So yeah, that's right. There was never ever any sort of even inference that that John were on sort of on dodgy ground. The club were completely behind him. The owner was completely behind him. There was absolutely no thoughts, of anything other than sticking with John Sheridan, and that's how it'll be.
I suppose you can't help that being interpreted, as it always is, as a vote of confidence, Andy.
Yeah, clubs can't win, can they? If a club backs a manager, then, well, he'll be sacked on Saturday then.
Yeah.
But quite rightly, there hasn't been any kind of whiff that John Sheridan was in danger of losing his job. He's done a super job at Chesterfield in the past, and at other clubs too. I think it's quite bewildering that Chesterfield are where they are. Even you said yourself at the top of the show, and I would echo that, John sounded exasperated by what he's seen. But Torquay, they were 8th going into the weekend. Pretty good form. That's a good win. Hopefully a turning point.
And I think when you look at the National League table, teams that were expected to sort of be at the top end of the table, your Files, Wrexhams, etc., are actually sort of in the bottom sort of half, all around ourselves, and the teams that are that were expected to sort of struggle are up there, sort of in the top half dozen, and we've played I think 7 out of 8 of the top teams, something like that. So it's
okay. Well, we'll come back to that later, and we'll talk about Anthony Gerrard and a name who's I'm trying to get the tongue still around a bit later in the show. You talk about playing teams at the top, quite the opposite for Sheffield Wednesday. Let's open this up now with Andy and Garry Monk off to a winning start as manager. But this weekend in Fulham, do you think that's the biggest test, perhaps the only serious test on paper they've had so far?
This season, I would say that it is, yes. I think that they were handed a kind start to the season, and I think that they dealt with that reasonably well. It was a very strong performance down at Reading, and as the season has wore on, there have been others too, less so even in victory against one or two of the opposition there, and that may well have caused Mr Chansiri just a pause for thought and a think about what he wanted to do next. But yes, in Fulham this weekend, a side who are expected not only to challenge for a place in the playoffs, but are possibly expected to challenge for the title. They have some super footballers. I think the victory at Huddersfield, there's no question Wednesday were the better team, no question. But Huddersfield, I think it was probably negatively described as Wednesday were the better of 2 average teams. I don't really have any fears, massive fears Wednesday aren't a top 10 team. It's just, can they prove that they are a playoff side? And something positive against Fulham this weekend, well, hopefully a win, clearly.
I'm totally with you.
Would be a massive shot in the arm.
I'm totally with you on your evaluation of the squad. And is it really a top 6 squad? They need to prove us wrong on that. Those players who've been around for a long time, senior players.
I think there are a lot of players in that team. On one hand, positively, you could say, hang your hat on. Can you hang your hat on Kieran Westwood? Absolutely. Tom Lees, Barry Bannon. I would add Kadeem Harris to that now. I think he's had a wonderful start to the season. Sam Hutchinson. But I think for various different reasons, beyond their control in some cases, like injury, and Fernando Forestieri's loss of form, I don't think you can hang your hat on him anymore. That's why obviously there's no guarantees of anything in football, but you look at it and go, look, you guys should achieve a top 10 place.
Yeah,
can you do better than that?
The question is, as a collective, because it's not really changed, you know, over 4 or 5 years. Stephen Fletcher, add to that list of a guy that you can hang your hat on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now you can, and he looks fitter, and he's clearly had a great pre-season. He's had a very strong start to the season as well. So yeah, absolutely him. But then you look away from that, and there are quite a lot of players that you can't.
No.
Whereas up the league or further up the league, you can maybe say a greater percentage of that squad. As I mentioned, the positive way of looking at Wednesday's squad is that you can hang your hat on those players. The negative way, I suppose, it's not necessarily a view I wholeheartedly subscribe to, but it's one of those things that you could argue if you were talking about it in the pub or whatever. There are many players on big contracts in comfort zones.
Oh, you could say. Well, it's up to them to come out and, you know, prove that wrong then.
Yeah.
Garry Monk, views on Garry Monk. First of all, have you ever had any contact with Garry?
I don't think I have,
Graham?
to be honest. No, I don't think I have. No. You know, he's clearly a competent, good manager. Did well his first season with Swansea. Did well at Leeds until
reasonably well. I thought,
he fell by the wayside.
It was a new ownership, wasn't it?
The new ownership. You know, not bit of a sort of a difficult time at Birmingham City.
But he did extremely well in that difficult. I thought that was the best job he did.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the fans post there, because you look on social media, don't you, and message boards and what have you. I think the Birmingham fans would give Garry Monk a good rating, given the problems that beset that football club.
I had contact from journalists down, you know, respected senior journalists down in the Midlands saying, you know, what a great job Garry Monk did, what a good guy he is, and how you'll enjoy working with him. So it was a big testimonial from there, and I think he's made a good impression on people. Obviously, a win helps, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, but I think he has made a good impression on people for starters. He's a clear thinker and a good organiser.
Well, the thing that has been most intriguing so far is, and this is not to say other managers don't do this, of course, but one of the reasons why Garry Monk has had success in his career is that players get the information they need. They're not overloaded or indeed undersold the information that they need in training. And each of the players that we've spoken to in the press conferences, the 2 or 3 press conferences that have been, everything is crystal. 2 or 3 instructions and a bit of a word to the wise. That's what you do. And obviously in one game and one game only, it's worked. So we'll see how that continues against Fulham. But it's, even if they don't beat Fulham, even if they lose to Fulham, it's not a bad way of going about things.
And I don't think we should be judging Garry Monk on finishing top 6 this season. I think we should be judging him long term. But nevertheless, while it's there, you've got to go for it.
Yeah, and, the problems are still there. Yeah. The squad he will want to work on in the transfer windows where they possibly can going forward. Nothing particularly in my mind's eye has changed. They need to sell. They have sold, obviously, Lucas João and earned a bit of money there, and that was a great deal, by the way. Jack Hunt's departure too, but it wouldn't do anybody any harm if that squad had a bit more freshness and TLC. And then, look, maybe next season is one where you have to say, look, there's a bit of pressure here, top 6.
There's a certain expectation. Yeah, I totally agree with you about the need to still trim and bring some money in if possible. Right, we are going to talk more Sheffield United very shortly, having been down to Bramall Lane and observed today. Before we do that, and before I round up 1 or 2 other matters, newsy at Chesterfield. Well, let's take sort of the negative side of it first, and then let's come on to a big positive in terms of the signing today. Anthony Gerrard, your erstwhile captain, has been in the news for some tweets last Saturday night. I think he wasn't playing, but he was supporting the team, and Saturday night got involved with one or two supporters. You're in charge of discipline, very much.
That's right. You know, and in fairness to Anthony, you know, we spoke to him on Tuesday about it. Did a disciplinary investigation. Anthony clearly couldn't deny what had happened, and he took his punishment on the chin.
Which included being stripped of the captaincy.
Which included being stripped of the captaincy, because he recognised that, you know, it had tarnished the reputation, his own reputation and the reputation of the club. And the reality of it is that in this day and age of social media, players and people in any walks of public life have to be extremely sort of careful about of what they say and what they don't say on social media. But I think that it is and I don't mean this specifically in relation to the Anthony Gerrard issue, I mean this sort of talking sort of generally. I think it's a case where, you know, there are two sides to the coin, and you know, sort of trolling is just not acceptable, irrespective of what industry you work in. And you know, it's been well publicised, sort of the fact that Anthony got involved in some exchanges. Yeah, it was inappropriate for him to do so. He shouldn't have done it. He accepts now he shouldn't have done it. But you know, you have to also look at, you know, sort of the trolling that goes on, you know, not just with him, but with others as well. Yeah,
it is a lot to bear. I mean, the best advice is perhaps not to look at it, or maybe not to be on social media. But, you know, the fact is that many footballers and managers, Andy, are on it.
Well, it's now become about, even in the smallest sense, about brand. Well, Gerrard, I suppose, or whoever.
And he's got a big following, or had. I don't think he's on it now, but
yeah, that's gone, hasn't it? But that's why they do it. I mean, with each passing day, I'm often reminded about how old school I am. I mean, the easiest way to not get involved on social media is to just ignore it. And what you say, you're ultimately going to get
You'll get told
out of
about
it anyway.
You're going to get told.
You'll get told, but you'll get told you're being abused. I mean, there is a value to journalists being on social media because it's a way of spreading news. What ultimately is a footballer or a sports person, apart from putting out there something they want to in a brand sense, and that might not necessarily apply to footballers in the National League, with great respect. You're essentially showing your life, aren't you, to people you don't know. And for all of the times, look, I dare say the footballers are sat on a coach and they've played well and they've scored or whatever they've done, and the praise must be wonderful. But is it really in any way, shape or form necessary to see the abuse? That's not to say that you should hide yourself away.
No, but you shouldn't.
Why
you're entitled not to be abused. I think everybody's got an entitlement not to be.
You are, but ultimately you're going to get it, aren't you? You can't stop that.
The difference between a journalist or a player being on a social media platform, they do it in their own names. You know, what is particularly sort of grating about social media is individuals that go on such platforms and hide behind pseudonyms. You know, 100%. and you know, there needs to be a balancing of the books, so to speak. You know, there needs to be some sort of recognition that, you know, there has to be some way of identifying these individuals.
I agree, well, trolling seems to be a focus in life, you know, right from the top, you know, and politicians get a lot of it, but I don't think it helps. When I see today, and I'm not even sure which party, but it comes back to me, it wouldn't matter which party this MP was on, publicly on national television, calling an ex-Prime Minister a TWAT. You know, you can't be in one breath in government appalled by the abuse that individuals take, which is ridiculous, and then in the other do that, because that is trolling.
Very much so. It's just evidence of, I agree, it's evidence of conduct on social media eking its way out into more mainstream media and public life.
Absolutely. I thought it was appalling, to be
when
honest.
you get to that, something needs addressing. I don't know what the answer is. Look, there are many positives which I wholeheartedly agree with about social media, but ID is certainly one of the negatives.
Social media can be a very effective, good communication tool if it's used in the right way. If it's used in the wrong way, then you know, that's where the problems start. And you know, the best sort of thing is to, as Anthony Gerrard's done, come off it.
He's come off it, right? Yeah. Okay. We're going to move on to the signing. Just before we do, and it's quite an exciting signing that you've made. Well done to Sheffield FC, who are doing great in their league. That's in the Northern Premier League South East Division. They've had a great start to the season. They're third, 15 points, 5 wins out of 7. In those 7 games, they've scored 22 goals, averaging just over 3 per game. And they hammered High Green Villa 6-0 on Tuesday in the Sheffield and Hallamshire Senior County Cup. So if you want goals, get along to the Coach and Horses. They're at Carlton Town this weekend, at Hallam, or at home to Harrogate Railway at Sandygate on Saturday. Right. Oh, by the way, War of the Monster Trucks have got their fanzine out for sale at Hillsborough with the Sheffield Wednesday v Fulham game. We did a preview on that on this show a few weeks ago. I'm sure it'll be great value and great fun, as always. So, Givaro Nepomukino, you're going to correct me, I've said that wrong. Anybody correcting me?
I'm not. I think you're right.
I just know him as Givaro.
Wow. And that's going to be on the shirt, presumably, Givaro. Yeah. Now, he's the left winger. There's been a search for a left-sided wide player for some time by John Sheridan, on loan at Chesterfield from Oldham until January. And Oldham fans are absolutely crestfallen everywhere you look on social media.
It's a player that John knows well. He was interested in him in the summer, but the player decided to sort of take his the contract that was offered at Oldham, so we felt that we lost out on him. But then, as these things sort of happen, he was made available. It took us sort of longer than what we would normally expect to put the deal together, simply because he was on international duty and he was involved in the team where the goalkeeper tragically died. So that sort of then meant that the player wanted to stay for the funeral of the goalkeeper, so it extended it. We're hoping that we could have had him in for last weekend, but it wasn't to be. But we have been working on it over the last couple of weeks. John was very, very keen on him. The owner sanctioned that we could sort of make a move on him, and that's what we did.
It seems the support is unstinting from the owner when John Sheridan wants to play.
You know, the reality of the situation is
he must get frustrated though, mustn't he?
Oh yeah, but the reality of the situation is that every player that John's asked for, so, you know, since he came to Chesterfield, the owner has sanctioned. You know, there's not one that he hasn't been there's been turned down for. So, you know, and this is yet another example. You know, in terms of, you know, recognition, despite the players that he's got, that John, you know, sort of made it clear that he wanted this player, and it was sanctioned. And then it's sort of put over to ourselves to sort of put it all together.
Look forward to better things as the season goes on.
You know, it's been well received by the supporters as well. You know, they see him as, they've clearly heard good reports about him from sort of, and looking at the Oldham sort of comments and the reaction.
Usually you get a reaction of you're welcome to him, don't you? You get that all the time.
And the
can't
feeling
wait to get a shot of him, drive in there myself and all this, but not this one. I think it's telling.
And the you know, sort of, you know, it's been commented on that, you know, sort of his ability is far higher than, you know, playing at National League level. So, you know, I think it's a feather in the cap of John Sheridan that he wanted to come and play for John. Yeah,
and John's got good links with Oldham. How many times has he been manager there in the past? Several times. I can't remember how many times it is, actually. Back to Sheffield United with five minutes left, and the events of today. Obviously, it's maybe not over yet, because Kevin McCabe, you know, a very good owner. Let's be fair to him. A staunch and committed, heart in the right place owner for 25 years. It must be devastating for him to be almost excommunicated at this point from Sheffield United.
Yeah, and he's released statements talking about his bitter disappointment. He has to now decide as to whether he wants to appeal the decision that was handed down by the court and what serves his interest best going forward. There were some fairly damning judgments during the handing down, what Justice Van Thorpe had said about just how this case had panned out, and it was a lot of he said, a lot of noise. Well, the detail, the black and white. Well, the judge has gone, obviously, clearly quite overwhelmingly in favour of Prince Abdullah and the Saudis, but clearly Kevin McCabe's association with Sheffield United, it seemed a bit sad, just as a personal reflection, it seems a little bit sad that this tenure has got to this point. That two people who are clearly highly driven guys, very successful in the worlds to which they swim and operate, and yet they couldn't come to something that meant that this didn't go to court. To their credit, of course, they kept supporting Chris Wilder as best they could and in as equal terms as they could during the course of the trial and all of that. But the fact that it may well be that Kevin McCabe isn't welcome back at Bramall Lane anytime soon is a little bit sad. I'm not saying he deserves a statue or anything like that, but a seat in the director's box.
It is sad, and you know, you get contacted by former players, you know, saying what a sad day this is. You know, there are an awful lot of people that, you know, feel devastated around his circle, and you can understand that. Whereas I think the supporters, while respecting Kevin McCabe's record, for them, you know, only one thing is paramount at the moment, and that's keeping the manager happy and keeping him there.
Well, that's it, isn't it? You can look at all things, and I realise there will be supporters that look at football clubs at the top end and what's going on there and etc. But most people, and look, and I dare say I would be the same, really. How are the team getting on? Is the manager being successful, and is the money there to strengthen that team and keep it going? Well, hopefully there will be.
Hopefully that is the case, but we know the nature of the beast in Kevin McCabe. That if ever there's a man who's not going to go down and stay down, if he feels he's got grounds for appeal, and he's made various different noises that he's still up for the fight, and the renewed and refreshed and comments such as that on the various different media, then it may well be by October the 14th. Notice is served of some kind of appeal, and regardless of whether that happens or not, it's not the end of the matter anyway, because a deal needs to be done for the sale of the ground, the training ground, and the other assets that have there, and that can run smoothly, or that may well again end up in court, of course. Yeah, while the High Court case was projected as a victory for the Prince, actually there's almost two verdicts there. It's a victory for Kevin McCabe in terms of the property values, which he's entitled to extract and do a deal on, but a loss of the shares, a loss of control, which you suspect this is about far more than money for him. It's a spiritual thing, isn't it, really? And it makes you think also what could have been possible had this have not ended acrimoniously. Yeah, what money would have been involved had it not have got down to court cases. If only they could have compromised, and there were a number of windows for compromise, it would seem. And it's fascinating to think that with all of that going on, that the team have gone from League One, 11th in League One, to the Premier League with all of that. And that everybody deserves a little bit of the slice of credit for that. They certainly do. More so than the staff and the team. Including the owners, actually, for financing it. I think Chris Wilder's operated in a bubble. And I think within that bubble and the people within that bubble, there's nobody more important and crucial going forward than another of the guys that was on the platform today, Steve Bettis, as chief executive, very close to Chris Wilder, but also gets on well with Prince Abdullah. So that looks promising. He didn't particularly like it when it was said about dealing with warring factions, but that is evidence of the job that he has done. And I think it's hugely significant that Steve is a successful guy in his own right, and with that carries a degree of respect. And how he's managed to deal with, if you like, those warring factions, I'll phrase it like that, even if he won't, whilst also keeping everything on a level, on an even keel for the manager and the team. Superb. So that, yes, they all deserve credit. Clearly none more so than Chris Allen and the lads, but the teams above deserve some credit for that as well. As you say, remarkable against that backdrop that so much has been achieved and can still be achieved in the future. Okay, well, that just about rounds up our hour. Thanks very much, gents. It's been a pleasure to see you again, Andy, and thanks very much for coming in and discussing all those issues. And Graham Bean as well. More power to the Spy Rights in the second half. I was going to say the second half of the season. We're nowhere near half-time yet, but we are at full-time on this show. It will be repeated at 11 p.m. as usual on my YouTube later. We'll be back with another show next week. See you then. Bye-bye.